Jayarata Matava Kunja Bihari Jayarata Matava Kunja Bihari Jayarata Kunja Bihari Jayarata Matava Kunja Bihari Jayarata Matava Kunja Bihari Gopichana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopichana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopichana Vallabha Girivaradari Pichana Vallabha Girivardhara Yashodanandana Brachachana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brachachana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brachachana Ranjana Shodanandana Brachachana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanacharya Yamuna Tiravanacharya Yamuna Tiravanacharya Jayarata Matava Kunja Bihari Jayarata Matava Kunja Bihari Gopichana Vallabha Girivaradari Pichana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopichana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopichana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brachachana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brachachana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brachachana Ranjana Shodanandana Brachachana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanacharya Yamuna Yamuna Tiravanacharya Yamuna Jayarata Matava Kunja Bihari Jayarata Matava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Haribol, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribol. Go Premanande, Haribol. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parirajacharya Satasata Shanadesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembly devotees, all glories to the assembly devotees, all glories to the assembly devotees, all glories to Shishiguru and Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 13, Text 7. Shurair Hritasva Kvacha Nirvina Cheta. Shurair Hritasva Kvacha Nirvana Cheta. Shochan Vimuyam Upayanti Kshmalam. Socham Vimuyan Upayati Kshamlam. Kvachich Chakandarva Puram Pravishtam. Kvachich Chakandarva Puram Pravishtam. Pramodati Nirvitravan Muhurtam. Pramodati Nirvritavan Muhurtam. Shurair Rita Svakva Chanirvana Cheta. Shochan Vimuyan Upayati Kshmala. Kashmalam. Kvachich Chagandarva Puram Pravishta. Pramodati Nivritavan Muhurtam. Sochan vimuyan upayati kashmalam. Kvachit jagandarva puram pravishta. Shurairita sva kvacha nirvina cheta. Sochan vimuyan upayati kashmalam. Kvachit jagandarva puram paravishta. Pramodate nirvita muhurtam. Vaishnavis. Shurairita sva kvacha nirvina cheta. Shochan vimuyan upayati kashmalam. Kvachit jagandarva puram pravishta. Pramodate nivritaman muhurtam. Shurairita sva kvacha nirvina cheta. Shochan vimuyan upayati kashmalam. Chichagandava puram pravishta. Pramodata nirviratan muhurtam. Surai, by very powerful enemies. Ritasva, all of whose possessions have been stolen. Kvacha, sometimes. Nirvina cheta, very morose and aggrieved at heart. Shochan, deeply lamenting. Vimuyan, becoming bewildered. Upayati, achieves. Kashmalam, unconsciousness. Kvachit, sometimes. Cha, also. Gandharvapuram, an imaginary city in the forest. Pravishtaha, having entered. Pramodate, he enjoys. Nirvritavat, exactly like a person who has achieved success. Muhurtam, for a moment only. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Sometimes being defeated or plundered by a superior, powerful agent, a living entity loses all his possessions. He then becomes very morose, and lamenting their loss, he sometimes becomes unconscious. Sometimes he imagines a great palatial city in which he desires to live happily with his family members and the riches. He thinks himself fully satisfied if this is possible, but such so-called happiness continues only for a moment. Purport. The word Gandharva Puram is very significant in this verse. Sometimes in the forest a very big castle appears, and this is called a castle in the air. Actually, this castle does not exist anywhere, but in one's imagination. This is called Gandharva Pura. In a material forest, the conditioned soul sometimes contemplates great castles and skyscrapers, and he wastes his energy for such things, hoping to live in them very peacefully with his family forever. However, the laws of nature do not allow this. When he enters such castles, he temporarily thinks that he is very happy, even though his happiness is impermanent. His happiness may last for a few years, but because the owner of the castle has to leave the castle at time of death, everything is eventually lost. This is the way of worldly transactions. Such happiness is described by Vidyapit as the happiness one derives upon seeing a drop of water in the desert. The desert is heated by scorching sunshine, and if we want to reduce the desert temperature, we need huge amounts of water, millions and millions of gallons. What effect will one drop have? Water certainly has value, but one drop of water cannot reduce the heat of the desert. In this material world, everyone is ambitious, but the heat is very scorching. What will an imaginary castle in the air do to help? Srila Vidyapati has therefore sung Tattala Sai Kate Vari Bindu Sama Sutta Mita Ramani Samache. The happiness of family life, friends, and society is compared to a drop of water in the scorching desert. The entire material world is busy trying to attain happiness because happiness is the prerogative of the living being. Unfortunately, due to falling in contact with the material world, the living entity simply struggles for existence. Even one becomes happy for a while, a very powerful enemy may plunder everything. There are many instances in which big businessmen suddenly become paupers in the street. Yet the nature of material existence is such that foolish people are attracted to those transactions and they forget the real business of self-realizations. Om Jnanati Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Namabhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Garamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakal Patarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Papanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Again the text. Sometimes being defeated or plundered by a superior powerful agent, the living entity loses all his possessions. He then becomes very morose and lamenting the loss. He sometimes becomes unconscious. Sometimes he imagines a great palatial city in which he desires to live happily with his family members and riches. He thinks himself fully satisfied if this is possible, but such so-called happiness continues only for a moment. So these are the descriptions of the forests of material enjoyment, which are described here in this 13th and 14th chapter. This 13th chapter is entitled Further Talks Between King Rahugana and Chadabharat, and where Chadabharat instructs the king and gives this analogy, right? And in the next chapter, chapter 14, the material world as the great forest of enjoyment, we will hear the same story again, but then with the actual explanation. Like now we have just all the story, basically. Of course, Prabhupada gives the translation in his purport. He explains it. But if you just read the Sanskrit, you just hear the story or the allegory, the analogy. But then in the next chapter, we will hear the exact explanation of this. So the allegorical story of the merchant, basically the idea here is that a merchant, one who tries to, make some money, basically by going to the forest and collecting some wood and some stuff he can sell on a market. But then on the way to do so, while going through the forest, he finds a lot of obstacles on the path, right? So what are some of the obstacles we heard so far? You remember?
Wild animals, plunderers.
Yes, wild. Of course, in the forest you find plunderers, like some thieves. They're just waiting someone enters the forest and then they steal what they have. Then there is animals like jackals, and there is also insects like mosquitoes. And then there is ghosts, and there's a whirlwind of dust, and there is a witch, and there is owls and invisible crickets and poisonous trees and forest fire and many more of such pythons and poisonous snakes and so on. So in this text today there is Prabhupada explains it as a Gandharva Pura. What is Gandharva? Or the Gandharvas, the celestial beings. Could you maybe close the door? Thank you. So here is described how the living entity entering into that forest, sometimes, although there is so much misery experienced, sometimes in spite of all the miseries experienced, the living entity sometimes starts to imagine how he could enjoy in a celestial palace in the air. Have you ever seen a palace in the air? Usually, I mean, we don't see so many palaces anyway nowadays. But if you see a palace, then they may be, situated on a hill somewhere, but they're not floating in the air usually, right? So here the merchant sees a palace, or he imagines a palace floating in the air, and he imagines how it would be nice to enter there and enjoy with his family members. But the point is that even if he would be able to attain such a thing, the happiness derived from such living in a palace, so-called happiness, continues only for a moment. It's very short. And Prabhupada quotes in the purport the poet Vidyapit, who has given that analogy that if you're in a desert and you're really thirsty, I don't know how it must be if you're several days in a desert. And last week we had Nirjal Ekadashi, right? Some of you fasted. Nirjal means water and Nir means no water. So for a whole day we don't take any water. So of course the next morning you feel like, I'm really thirsty now. But imagine you're a couple of days in a desert where it's super hot and you're sweating like anything and you don't have anything to drink. So that must be really a great thirst. And then if someone brings a drop of water, how much is that of any use? And Prabhupada explains, of course, water is of value, great value, but if it's only a drop, it will not be able to make any difference. So similarly, actually, to be in a material world is a very precarious situation, very dangerous and difficult situation, and mostly the living entity experience all kinds of miseries and sufferings. And in between, there is so-called happiness, and we become very much bewildered by that happiness. We think, okay, now I enjoy. But actually, that happiness is very flickering. That's basically the point here. And it's interesting, in the scriptures we find many such analogies. Now we heard one, the drop of water in the desert. There's many other. One famous we find in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 11.745. Yasyaiva purusho samastri. No, that's different. Yasyaiva purusha samastri chakra pando mrityorda santrakatopi manasavinam vai lokam punala pati atma suritayaya sarvasuyaya tu manorata racharamsa. And here it says that, it gives an analogy. Basically, a person is in a forest and he is hunted by a wild elephant. Sometimes it's also said a wild tiger, like a tiger. Here it says elephant. Anyway, a wild animal is kind of chasing behind a man, and that man is running and running, and because he's not so careful running, then he falls into a ditch or a well, and then he just kind of is able to catch himself on a liane, like a kletterpflanze, how you say in English, like a creeper. He just holds on a creeper, and then beyond, like below in the ditch, there is a poisonous snake, kind of showing their teeth, ready to bite. So on the top you have that tiger or elephant chasing, and below you have that snake who is ready to bite, and then you're only hanging on this little creeper. And then on the creeper there is two mouses, a white mouse and a black mouse, and they're both kind of eating on that creeper. So basically what happens, any moment you're either swallowed by the tiger or trampled by the elephant, or you're bitten by the snake, because you're any moment falling down. But then what happens, there is a tree over this well, and there is some honey dropping from there, and you're kind of stretching your tongue and catching some drops of honey, and you think, very nice, very sweet, very nice. Is that kind of a reasonable or an intelligent way to enjoy? Yes, there is some sweetness on my tongue because the honey is very sweet and tasty, very nice. But if you look at the whole circumstances, it's rather foolish to then focus all your attention on the enjoyment, isn't it? Because maybe it would be better to find some way out of the difficulties, trying to, I don't know. So that's an analogy which is given. So basically the wild elephant or the tiger represents death, which is always chasing us, like in any moment we can die. Then the well or the ditch is the samsara, the snake is the time or the destruction of the body, and then that creeper is a limited time that we have to live, it's limited. And then what is the white and the black mouse? The day and night who take away that lifespan. And then, of course, the honey represents some kind of sense gratification, material happiness. And but when we look at this analogy, we can see how much misery is there, how much difficulties, and how much enjoyment. Enjoyment is very little, and the difficulties are great. That's basically what the Bhagavatam tries to tell us, that, okay, yes, there is some happiness. We don't deny that there is some happiness in this world, but the happiness is actually very little compared to all the challenges that we may face, or that we certainly will face in this material world. So there is always three kinds of kleshas, suffering. There is birth, disease, old age, and death. So many ways we can experience suffering. Nevertheless, we still try to enjoy many different ways. Another analogy or a way to explain this I've often mentioned is, imagine your favorite sweet. I don't know what you like, Brindavan Chandra, what is your favorite sweet? Chocolate, Swiss chocolate. Of course, we're in Switzerland. Swiss chocolate. Okay, Swiss chocolate. Yeah, let's take Swiss chocolate, or if you want to go for a Vedic sweet, we can have Shrikant or Kheer. Imagine, you're just about to eat some Swiss chocolate or some Kheer, and someone is dropping some sand on the top. How will it taste? You can say, okay, crunchy, but actually, it basically spoils the fun, right? Because the chocolate is still sweet, the kheer is also still tasty, but in between there will be, sand. Like how can you eat it? So similarly, yes, there is enjoyment in this world we can enjoy, but that enjoyment is always mixed with some sand, mixed with some miseries also. Because we are in a world of duality. There's always happiness and distress. always happiness and distress. There's always Swiss chocolate and some sand. There is always happiness and some suffering. And that's just how it works in this material world, right? And that makes life a bit complicated. And usually the conditioned soul, that Prabhupada calls it the struggle for material existence, is that the conditioned souls always tries to avoid suffering and to gain material happiness. No? That's basically always the struggle. How can I avoid any pain, and how can I get as much as happiness as possible? That's usually the mentality. But the scriptures, they condemn this, because why do the scriptures condemn this? Because happiness and distress is anyway coming according to our karma. Prahlad Maharaj is explaining that. No? When you take birth, there's prarabdha karma, manifested karma according to your past activities and actions or decisions. And in this life, you will experience a certain amount of happiness and distress, which is destined for you. So whether you're working hard for it or not, or whether you're trying or planning, you will experience some happiness and some misery. Like, usually we plan for happiness, but we usually don't plan for pain or suffering, right? It's not that we say, okay, today is Thursday, maybe this afternoon I will break my leg, or maybe my husband is leaving me, or my wife, or maybe I, lose my job today. It's not that we are looking forward or planning that. But nevertheless, it happens. Whether we want or not, things happen like that. So suffering is just coming whether we want it or not. And similarly, happiness is also, just things happen in a way. So then why should we make a separate endeavor for these? But rather we should just, matras parsha tu kaunteo shitoshna shukatukada, we should just tolerate the happiness and distress that comes and goes like summer and winter. We should just tolerate. Just, okay, if there's happiness, fine, we are happy. If there's misery, okay, now I have to tolerate. But without being overly disturbed by happiness and distress, and then just focus on the spiritual journey, on self-realization. That's what Shastra usually recommends. Of course, the problem is often we kind of lose track of this, and then we get entangled in our search for happiness. And of course, this is how Maya works. It's described that Maya has these two kinds of Shaktis, Avaranatmika Shakti and Prakeshpatmika Shakti. The first one, the Avaranatmika Shakti, is the covering potency. Basically, Maya is covering us, is deluding us. And in this way, we forget our true knowledge and consciousness and identity. And then the other is the throwing potency of Maya, which casts the living entity down into various forms of miseries. And of course, it's not that we are just pulled down by Maya because Maya is such an evil witch and we are such innocent living entities. That would be more the maybe Christian understanding of the evil, who kind of, Satan or the evil. But Maya is more an energy that works basically to test us, and it works according to our decisions. Because we are responsible, because we take some decisions, because we are having some desires, then Maya is kind of binding us. So there's a difference, you see. It's like because we make a decision, we have a desire, then Maya. Like there is this story with, I think it's King Chanak, who asked a saint, there was a saintly person coming. And whenever a saintly person comes, it's good to ask questions, to try to get some advice from saints. So the king asked, "Oh, saintly person, please tell me, how can I ever become free from bondage of Maya, of the samsara, cycle of birth and death?" And what did the sage do? He went and he embraced, this was in a kind of the courtyard of the palace, and there were some thorny bushes. And the sage kind of embraced the thorny bushes and was screaming, "Ah, please let me go, let me go." And everyone was like wondering what's going on. Has the sage become nut? Has he become crazy? Why he's embracing the thorny bush and his hands already bleeding, and he's screaming, "Let me go!" And then the king, what are you doing? Just let go, just. And then the sage said, "Well, that's exactly what you're doing, Master, like the king, because you're holding on to Maya, and that's why Maya gives you a lot of pain. But the only thing you have to do is to let go." So it's not that actually Maya is. It's not that actually Maya is binding us, but we are binding ourselves by our desires. By our desires and decision, we are bound by Maya. Maya is just a servant of Krishna, doing her job. But as soon as we let go and we surrender to Krishna, then Maya is also leaving aside. And of course, this whole description that we hear now in this part of the Bhagavatam, this material forest, or the forest of enjoyment, describes basically the trap of family life also. And this is, of course, also described in other parts of the Bhagavatam. For example, by Rishabdev, which we discussed a couple of months ago. Pungsastriya mitunam bhava etam tayor mita ridhaya granti mahu aho atogriya kshetra sutapta vitair janasya moham aham memeti. So the attraction between male and female is the basic principle of material existence. On this basis of this misconception, which ties together the hearts of a male and female, one becomes attracted to this body, home, property, children, relatives, and wealth. In this way, one increases life's illusions and thinks in terms of I and my. So this pungsastriya mituni bhavam, so that attraction between male and female, then creates this hridaya grantim, that knot in the heart, which ties the two souls very close together. And then the illusion of aham mameti, this is mine and that's for my enjoyment, becomes stronger, and one becomes attached to one's body, to one's home, to one's possession, children, relatives, and wealth. That's how the Bhagavatam describes this. And therefore, for devotees especially, it's important, of course we know there is two things. There is the Grihastha ashram and there is the Kriya Medi. Not Kriya Medi ashram, but there is the Grihastha ashram and there's Kriya Medi. There's two types of family life, right? And the important word here is the Kriya, just means house. It's the place where people live together. And of course, house means also entanglement, because to maintain a house, everything which belongs to it. But then ashram is the important word, because ashram means a place of shelter. And in that sense, when two Vaishnavas come together, a Vaishnava and a Vaishnavi, and if they have a family, then that place also becomes an ashram, where they take shelter of each other. They take shelter of course, they take shelter of Krishna, which Krishna putting in the center, and then the whole household is basically circled around serving Krishna. Then that place becomes a temple and an ashram. And then the whole misery that we find in this description will not apply, right? I mean, as much as we have Krishna in the center, in that degree, the misery will not apply. And the more Krishna comes out of the center, and the more we keep our own sense gratification in the center, then this description will apply even in our Krishna conscious marriage life. So yeah, that's basically a warning that the Bhagavatam gives, because for a materialistic person, these descriptions certainly apply fully, and for devotees they also apply. And there is a great danger that one falls into that trap, but as much as one keeps Krishna in the center, it will not apply as much. Hare Krishna. So that's basically what this chapter describes. Jai Jagannath Baladev Subhara Shri Gaur Nitai Ki Jai. Now, regardless of one's ashram, whether one is a Grihastha or a vanaprasti or brahmachari sannyasi, one thing is in common of all living entity, the search for happiness, isn't it? Everyone wants to be happy, everyone wants to experience some happiness. And as long as we identify with the body, or as much as we identify with the body, as much as we also try to find happiness through the body. That's basically that's the difficulties, because when we try to find happiness through the body, that kind of happiness is very temporary, right? What is Krishna saying about this? Yehi samsparshata bhogha dukkha yunaya evate adyanta vanta kanteo nateshu ramate buddhaha. Who is the Buddha? Who is the Buddha? Buddha is the intelligent one, the one with the buddhi, the one with intelligence. And what is he doing? Nateshu ramate. Ramate means pleasure. He's not nateshu. He's not taking pleasure in what? In that pleasure which is derived from the senses. Usually that's what we're doing. Like the eyes want to see something beautiful, the ears wants to listen something nice, the tongue wants to taste something sweet, the hands want to touch something soft. So in this way, we are always going for the sense gratification. Whatever we can see and experience, that's what we like to enjoy, right? And that's quite natural because we are looking for happiness. But Krishna says, well, a Buddha, an intelligent person, he doesn't do that. Why? Because this happiness has a beginning and an end. Adyanta vanta. Beginning and end. And that's why it's very short. But the soul actually looks for something, lasting. And also, dukkha yunaya evate, Krishna says, it's actually the source of misery. That what we think it's happiness, actually at the end it becomes a problem. It becomes difficulties. And it's interesting, I found here, there's a description, this is from Vedanta Deshika, which is a scripture from the Sri Sampradaya. There it describes the Shabda Dosha, the 7 defects, 7 defects in material happiness. Do you like to hear them? Or do you like to remain in illusion and think? Okay, 7 doshas, 7 defects with material pleasure. First of all, it's alpa. Alpa. I knew that word it's in Sanskrit, in Bengal, in Oriya, it's the same word. Like I lived in Orissa for some time, and when they were serving rice, I always had to say alpa, alpa, because otherwise they would put so much rice. Alpa means little. Little, please give me little rice. But the thing is, the defect, material pleasure, is alpa, means their end result are trivial or little. No, if you get material happiness, actually that what you get is only little. That's the first defect. The second, ashtira, they are transient and impermanent. It's only flickering, it's not lasting. Third, asukara, not easily obtained, they require much effort and are time consuming. If you actually want to enjoy, then you have to work hard to get that kind of enjoyment. So that's also a defect. Then 4, ashukavashana, ultimately ending in grief and disappointment. Even if you get it, after you have worked hard for it, then what you get actually is, it ends in disappointment. Then, dukkhanvita, it's always accompanied by disappointment and supported only by struggle. So it's, as we said, it's happiness and distress goes together. Even you get some happiness, there is always some distress also involved. Then 6, anuchittam, that's very important. Anuchittam, incompatible with our essential being. It's incompatible. We are soul and we are of spiritual nature, and the happiness we derive in the material world is material, it's temporary, and that's why it's not going to work actually. It's like Prabhupada gives the example, if you take a fish out of the water It's incompatible. The fish cannot live on the air. It's not working. And that's one of the main defects of material happiness. It's actually not satisfying the soul. It's not giving satisfaction to the true self. And then 7, Abhiman, Mula, they are based upon false sense of self and lead to further perpetuation and of this delusive sense of identity. So basically, Abhiman means that identification, or Mula means the root. It's based on false identity, because I think I'm the body, and that's why I get happiness through the body, but that's the defect. Because, as we know, we are not these bodies. So these are 7 defects of material happiness. And knowing that, why should we go for it? No? Why should we strive for these kind of pleasures? But what are we doing? We nevertheless feel attracted towards it, right? So what should we do in this situation? Dovetail, yes, we can try to. Yukta Vairagya means we can try to engage whatever we do in our life. We can try to engage, dovetail our activities with Krishna, and in this way try to offer it Krishna, try to do it for Krishna. The most important point here is that the soul is looking for happiness. We are looking for pleasure. That's kind of what the soul is looking for, right? And but we are looking at the wrong place. That's the problem. No. We're looking outside, whereas actual pleasure and happiness should be found inside. That's the whole point of this. And Prabhupada also beautifully describes this in the Bhagavad Gita. Let me see. In a purport to this Ye Samsparsha Jabhoka, Prabhupada says. Basically, Prabhupada quotes from the Purana. The mystic derive ultimate transcendental pleasure from the absolute truth, and therefore the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, is also known as Rama. Krishna is known as Rama, and Rama is the source of all pleasure. Right? So that's why the mystic or the yogi, he finds ultimate happiness in Rama, in Krishna, and in this way he becomes happy. And then in the purport to text 24, Prabhupada says, a liberated person enjoys happiness by factual experience. He can therefore sit silently at any place and enjoy the activities of life from within. Such a liberated person no longer desires external material happiness. This state is called Brahma Bhuta. So, Krishna says, one whose happiness is within, who's active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. So if you understand that happiness actually is found within, then one finds that true happiness. And it's interesting, the Christian is kind of a mystic and monk. Thomas Merton, he made a statement that in everyone's heart, there's like in the heart is like a sacred space, and in that sacred space is like a vacuum, which cannot be filled with anything from the material world. Only God Himself can, enter in that place. And His Holiness Satchidananda Maharaj, then he takes that a step further, and he says that there is a shape there is a hole in the heart, a vacuum, and he gives the example of this wooden toy. Have you ever seen this? There's a wooden toy which has different holes, a circle hole, then a square and triangle hole, and you have a ball, and the ball of course only goes where there is the circle, right? So the child has to find the proper form. So Satchidananda Maharaj says, in the heart we also have such a form, and we have to find the proper piece to put it in. And what is the shape of the form? Tribanga. There is a Tribanga form, three-band form of Krishna, a shaped vacuum, a hole in our heart. And only Krishna can fill that. So only if we allow Krishna to take seat in that, in our heart, then that vacuum can be filled. And Prabhupada beautifully describes this in several places, that actually everyone is hungry. Prabhupada says, one who is hungry is never satisfied with anything other than food. The whole material world is full of hungry living beings. The hunger is not for good food, shelter, or sense gratification. The hunger is for spiritual atmosphere. No. Everyone is hungry, Prabhupada says. But the actual hunger is for spiritual. Such hunger can be satisfied only when the living being is situated in immortality, when he again connects with Krishna. And therefore, it is so important that we connect with Krishna and actually feel Krishna's presence. Because if we connect with Krishna, then we can find that true happiness. And that's why that higher taste, as Krishna describes, param drishtva nivartante, higher taste is so important. No? Krishna explains that a living entity can kind of retreat from sense gratification, but within he will still have the taste. But if he develops a higher taste, then he can give up that lower taste. So basically the question that we raised, although we theoretically know that material happiness will not give us satisfaction, we still are feeling attracted. We are still hankering to it. So what can we do? We have to develop a higher taste for spiritual happiness or spiritual life. And then we can easily let go the lower taste. Right? That's basically our, or Krishna's solution that he offers us. By connecting with him, by developing a higher taste, then we can give up the lower taste. So here in this section of the Bhagavatam, this merchant, he imagines a nice Gandharva Pura, a nice palace in the air, but this kind of happiness will not really satisfy the soul. Hare Krishna. Any comments or questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Veda Vyas wrote all these Vedic scriptures.
Yes.
We always hear that more than 90% is karma kanda.
Mm-hmm.
Karma kanda means you read what you have to do that you become happy.
Yes.
And then my question is why you wrote so many books? How we can enjoy?
No,
You said do not. They want that we do something else.
Yeah.
More than 9% is exactly that we make things to get good karma.
Yeah.
Karma means you
So enjoy, yes. Like the Ritvika, I have here a shloka. Ritvika says, Apama somam amrita abhum apsharopir viraham. That means we have drunk soma and have become immortal. We have entered the realm of the light. We have become the gods and we enjoy ourselves with the apsaras. That's the description of the Rig Veda. Let's enter the heavenly garden, let's drink soma rasa, and let's enjoy the young virgin, young woman. That's the description given in the Vedas. And yes, and your question is, why is giving so much stress on this heavenly pleasure? Because that's what we want. Now that's actually the reason. Because the living entity, that's what the living entity wants, is actually this kind of happiness. And that's why the Vedas, according to our needs and our desires, they give us ways to achieve that. And only very few people want actually spiritual perfection. That's why only a shorter little fraction is given on the spiritual dimension. But of course, there's a trick behind the whole thing. Because if human beings just run for material enjoyment without Vedic injunction, without following Shastra, then they are called two-legged animals. They are not better than animals. Because animals, they don't have any culture, they don't have religion, they're just going according to their instincts. If human beings do the same, they are living like animals. But if they take to Shastra, they visit the temple, they offer donations to the Brahmanas, and the Brahmanas, they do rituals for them, then they are uplifted. But the entry is sense gratification, because that's what they want. They want to enjoy. And then the entry is to go to the temple, do a yajna, to attain greater happiness. And then while they're coming to the temple, they maybe also hear about Vishnu, they hear about Vaikuntha, and after some time, they may develop a desire which is higher than that. That's how the Veda actually tries to trick them. They are attracted by this kind of shlokas that I just mentioned, Somarasa and Apsaras. In this way, they are kind of attracted, and then they develop further consciousness later on. So 2 reasons. First of all, we want this kind of enjoyment, that's why it's given. And second, it's a trick to bring us in to the spiritual path, eventually, step by step. Because if the Veda would only describe about the highest renunciation and then nobody would read it. I mean, that's how it is explained. But yeah, we know because Vedavyas didn't feel satisfied, and then Narada Muni told him, well.
Yeah, this story I know.
So then that's why.
You said two-legged animals.
Yes.
But if you worship demigods, they are what? According to Krishna?
Less intelligent.
No, there's a verse.
Yes, of course, because that's just the beginning, and that's not the ultimate goal. That's why they're foolish. But it is a beginning. It is still better. That's when we look at the yoga ladder. It starts with karma kanda. And of course, there is a difference between karma kanda and karma yoga. As soon as you speak of yoga, yoga means connecting with Krishna. As soon as yoga, there is a connection, and it's spiritual. But without yoga, then it's just material. So karma kanda that's what most, also like most Hindu temple you go, you just do karma kanda activity, offering some coconut and wanting something in return. That's just karma kanda. Yes. Okay. Let's try to develop a higher taste. That's our only chance. And I mean, Krishna is very merciful, because the process of Krishna consciousness, susukam kartum avyayam, is preformed with happiness. That's why it's actually not so difficult to develop a higher taste. Of course, we just have to develop, it needs to be enough deep. Actually, we have to have more taste in spirituality than in material life. Like if you wait, at least 51% should be spiritual, 49% material taste. It should be higher, If it's higher, then you're going towards the safe side, But if it's lower, then you're in trouble, actually. Then eventually you will be pulled down again to lower taste. That's why it's so important to increase our spiritual taste. Okay, thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, the Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol, Krishna. Gaur Bhakta Brinda Ki Jai, Vanchakalpatarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhubhyevacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. Jai. Bist du gerade in der Gegend gewesen, oder was? Hare Krishna.
Jetzt geht's definitiv ernst. Das ist cool. Super. Und fühlst du dich gut? So. Jetzt kommt dann gut übereinander. Ja, nein, ich habe total alles gelesen und ich habe gefunden, wow, Krishna wieder.
Ja, schön.
Ja, nein, haben wir ja auch geschrieben, hat sich mega gefreut.
Ja, ja, für die Geschichte. Ich habe so ein Smile, das sagst du, wow.
Ja, nein, mega.
Ja, das ist natürlich, also ja, ist auch ein Unterschied.
Ja, logisch, und dann meine ich doch, jetzt sind Sekretär gewesen.
Ja, da bringst du noch ein bisschen Zeit mit.
Ja, und weißt du, schön ist das für mich. Also weißt du, das ist das so schön. Das ist gigantisch, ja. Ja, dass er endlich wieder mal da ist und so. Mega, das freut mich riesig. Und kommt der Prabhu auch noch. Ja, mega sweet. Mega sweet. Und ja, wenn dann jetzt bist du eben bald, dann bringt es in Form sein.
Ja.
Und dann hast du was wieder losgeklappert. Ja, logisch. Also kann man nicht aber. Weißt du, mal sicher, ja, logisch. Ja, logisch. Nein, das ist so gigantisch. Der Ramdas wahrscheinlich, oder der Ramdas. Und wahrscheinlich der Fidel auch.
Ja, schön.
Der Fidel International. Das ist ja nicht Militär, das ist sozusagen seine RS.
Ja,
Weißt du, ja. Und eben, das haben wir auch nicht gehört. Komm jetzt. Komm mal über die Gelegenheit. Mit Papazia. Also es sind mega gut da, ja. Die Geburtstag so mit der Waffe laufen. Und dann Krishna's Places. Sag auf die optimale Vorbereitung jetzt. Oh ja. Besser spät als nie. Kannst du dir noch überlegen? Ich bin nicht sicher. Wir können vielleicht noch sicher irgendwie treffen. Schauen. Aber wäre schon ein bisschen reizvoll auch, oder?
natürlich wäre es schön. Wäre nice.
Ja.
Aber ja, nach einer Agenda oder was ist sonst noch so?
Ja, ja, schau mal, das wäre vielleicht der Burner. Wir sind ja, weißt du, wirklich zu viert im Zelt. Zu viert im Zelt. Wir sind ja erst das Kirchenzelt, das Zelttal. Weißt du, dort bin ich.
Also überall, wo du hingehst, haben sie so Zeltparat, oder?
Ja, ja, die tun um 5:30 Uhr morgen brechen sie ab. Erst einmal Alarm.
Ja.
Und dann um 6 Uhr laufst du los und dann überholt jemand den Traktor, stellt alles wieder auf und am zweiten Tag ist alles wieder aufgestellt.
Ja.
Krishna?
Ich kann vor Jahren mal den Navadvip-Parikrama gemacht.
Okay, ja.
Das ist nur eine Woche. Aber
Ja, ja.
trotzdem bin ich auch eine Woche unterwegs.
Okay.
Und dort haben sie auch so, das war schon erstaunlich gewesen. Du kommst ja an alles steht schon.
Ja, genau. Ja, wirklich.
Das ist voll.
Und jetzt sind es halt in 4 Wochen.
Ja.
Ist das so ein Govardhan-Parikrama? Ist das wirklich...
Spaziergang.
Und totale Erholung, weil es ist alles Sand.
Ja, ja.
Also weißt du, es ist alles Sand. Sonst ist es halt dann nochmal ein Kies und Asphalt.
Wir haben alles Bargos gemacht.
Ja, ja. Und dann morgen und dann läufst du durch die Dunkel durch die Dörfer, Bach durch. Ich weiß nicht so genau, was dort alles da drin ist. Aber es ist eigentlich, am Ende des Tages ist es ein bisschen wie eine Massage von Radharani.
Das ist
So,
so interessant,
ja, ich habe es so angeschaut. Also, ich meine, am Schluss war es totaler Genuss gewesen. Also weißt du, so...
Bleibst du jetzt mal oder willst du das jetzt?
Das geht schnell. Ich bin wieder dort, bis wieder zum...
Ah, schön.
Hey.